Hey, guys. That's you guys. It's official. You're teen authors. Yeah? Own it, baby. That's awesome. Welcome. I was a teen author, too, though we didn't have this kind of crap when I was growing up. We were just awkward, nerdy, alone with our secrets and our, we didn't network. You couldn't network with other writers. You'd say, I want to be a writer, and people were like, yeah, so does everybody, and then you just learn to shut up. I'm going to show you a little bit about my background. Oh, I know. So my mom says I started to make up stories before I could talk, and I was in the high chair going, and she's like, you get really into it. There'd be like drama, and you'd be like, you're like, ooh, something interesting just happened. We're not sure. This is a story I wrote when I was in kindergarten. Yeah, that was the height of my artistic career. My skills have gone down. I love the green fingernails on that witch, though. And it turns out she's like a really evil witch in the story, but check out that smile. She's like so happy in her evilness. I love that character. So this is me in 4th grade. Yeah. I know. So we started out here, right? Oh, and then we got to here, and it's like, oh. The cute baby teeth came out, And I don't know, as things changed, redheads were not popular when I was growing up. That was the word on the street. These guys would say, we used to do rating calls. Do you do this? You probably don't do this. You guys don't use telephones anymore, I understand. They're like, you actually make calls that don't involve this? No, but we used to do rating calls because we didn't have caller ID. And so you'd call somebody from one of the guys in the class and say, try to disguise your voice, this is a rating call. Well, how do you rate? And then you'd list girls in the class, and the guys would rate you from 1 to 10. I don't know why we put ourselves through this torture. It was like the worst idea. I was never rated above like a 3. I know, thank you. I appreciate that. Fellow nerds. Right? But the comment was usually, well, I don't really like redheads. So things were not going well there for me. But this is the year that I decided I wanted to be a writer. I wrote down on a piece of paper that I still have that I wanted to be a writer. It was when I was in 4th grade. And I started writing several books that year. And I never stopped writing. This is where I wrote down she's in 4th, yeah, she's right here. She's in 4th grade, and she hopes to be a writer. And that was the first year I think I actually discovered that you could do that people actually wrote books and that they weren't all dead. This is a story I did in 5th grade. All right, so here I am, age 13. Can I get a nerd peeps? Can I get it? Thank you. Braces, but only on my first 4 teeth. So they called me Fang. Because, my eye teeth would hang down. Just to make this picture worse for you, because you don't have the historical context, adults in the room will understand, this was the 1980s, and I had just the day before tried to get a perm, which is a thing we used to do. But it turns out red hair doesn't perm. It is what it is. If it comes curly or not, that's all it's going to be for your life. And so I had tried to do the corkscrew perm, and what it came out is just sort of like a haystack look. And the bangs were supposed to be this because that was awesome, but it was just this. And so it was a depressing time. But I still wanted to be a writer. But I noticed around this age something changed, and maybe you guys have noticed this too. When I was the younger girl, and I was still cute, and I'd say, I want to be a writer when I grow up, people would be like, okay, you can do that. You're so cute. And then when I got to this age and said, I want to be a writer when I grow up, the response changed, and it was, ooh, that's really tough. You got to have a backup plan. Oh, I don't know if yes. Your mom and my mom probably are really close. And you're going to keep hearing that over and over again. And it's not that it's not true. It is tough. But it also really stinks to hear it. And so what I did is I decided, I went into the writer's closet. I stopped telling people that I wanted to be a writer, and I kept it a secret for many, many years. And I went to high school. Yeah? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's the best picture I ever took in my life. That's why I kept it. This guy over here, married him 11 years later. I know. He looks absolutely nothing like that now. Does he, Gabe? Yeah, my nephew's here. He's like, I don't think Gabe would have known who that was if I hadn't said it. Totally bald and built like an orc. He's the kind of guy that walks into a room. Guys do this apparently, I didn't know. Guys walk into a room and the first thing they do is they look around to see if there's anybody they couldn't take. And then they're like, keep an eye out for that one, and then I'm okay. Yeah. He never walks into a room and finds someone that he couldn't take. He's that kind of guy. Totally bald, though. Let's make sure we mention that. All right. He's awesome. And I kept writing all this time, again, in secret. And, you know, something, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to be a writer at this age, as a teenage writer, because I was never able to finish anything. I could finish poems and short stories, but I wanted to be a novelist because that's what I love to read. I love to read novels, and I was never able to finish a book. And so I thought, I don't have enough ideas, and that's my problem. And it wasn't that. Once you get into writing, as other writers in here I think will attest, ideas are no problem. Like, you have more ideas you could possibly do with. It was just training my brain to be a writer. And there are skills that you can learn. You can't learn necessarily how to love story. You can't learn how to have a sense of story and character. You can learn how to be a crafter. You can learn how to discipline yourself. Those things you can learn. So if you're in a situation where you're like, I want to be a writer, but I don't know if I can because I don't have enough ideas or I never finish anything, I would just say, don't worry about that. That comes. For me, I didn't have enough life experience at this age to complete a novel. And now it's no problem. Sometimes it just takes the years. So take the pressure off yourself. So I went to college, and like most college students, did sock puppet shows in my basement with my friends. Nerds. And all this time I kept writing, again in secret. I was an English major. And, but something happened, in fact, a little bit before this, that kind of alarmed me. The reason why I wanted to become a writer in the first place was because I loved reading. I loved books, and I couldn't stop making up those stories in my brain, right? Couldn't stop thinking about stories of my own. But when I was in college, I went out to a bookstore with a friend, and it was a lovely independent bookstore that has since closed by the University of Utah called the Waking Owl. Is that right? The Waking Owl? Nerd peeps, do we remember? I can't remember anymore. Anyway, we were walking in the bookstore, and he was running his hands over the books, and he said, "Oh, don't you just love them?" And my immediate reaction was, no. And it shocked me because I thought, how did this happen? I want to be a writer. I'm an English major. I love to read. What happened that suddenly, when I looked at the books, I felt like, oh, it's all homework, and it's all things I have to do, and I'd lost the love of reading. And looking back, what happened was I fell out of love with reading when I was about 16 years old. And that was the age when I decided, because all of the assignments we were given in high school English classes were books that were written by white men that had been dead at least 100 years, that those were the only appropriate books that you could read as an adult. Those were the only things that were good for you. And so I stopped reading for pleasure. I started reading from a list of the classics because I felt like that was the only thing that was appropriate for me at that age. And everything I read was depressing. And then I went into college, and I was an English major. Again, everything was depressing. There were no genres are allowed, unless they're at least 2,000 years old. Then you can have fantasy. But other than that, no genres. And every character starts with potential and ends with misery and despair. A couple books like that, awesome. Every book like that, I felt like I was getting beat up daily. And I just stopped loving to read. And it took me years to realize, wait a minute, I don't have to just read one kind of book. I can read a lot of different kinds of books. And I started to do this experiment that this is a really fun exercise, actually, if you want to do it, is I would write a paragraph, because I couldn't manage to finish a novel. I would write a paragraph as if it was from the middle of a novel. I would name the book and sort of pick a genre and style, and then I would write a random paragraph from the center of that book. And I had pages and pages and pages of this, and it was such a fun activity. And it's actually what got me back into loving to write again. So I graduated from college and went on to get an MFA, and it was a solemn occasion. I got an MFA in creative writing. You don't have to. I don't think that that's necessary to become a writer. But for me, it was necessary because I was so stuck in that writer's closet and so afraid of claiming it. I kind of just needed a boot in the butt. And to get around some other writers and to be like, this is okay. This is okay for me to want to do this and to love it. And so I did. And I started, while I was getting my graduate degree, writing a book that became The Goose Girl. And I'd also written some short stories that I thought were really good. And you know, when I write a book or a short story, I don't just write it once, but I'm a rewriter. I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. The Goose Girl I rewrote at least 30 times. The first draft of The Goose Girl I rewrote at least 50 times. And so I felt like finally I'd gotten to the point where I was ready to be published. I've been writing for 15 years. I'd written 100 stories that I felt like were my stepping stones. I decided I was going to write 100 stories and throw them away before I was ready to be published, and I had done that. And I'd written a book, a couple books actually, and a short story collection I thought was great. Started sending stuff out to see if I could get accepted anywhere. And you know what happened? Can you guess? Yeah. Gabe, can you come help me for a second? This is my nephew, Gabe. Come on down. Yeah, jump on. Come on down. Yeah. Gabriel Max Janke. Men want to be him. Women want to date him. All right. Here, go on down, Gabe. I'm going to unroll it to you. These are some of the rejections I got before I ever got an acceptance. Keep in mind, this is after 15 years of writing and a master's degree in creative writing and 100 stories that I threw away. These were just the cream of the crop, and this isn't all of them. These are just the ones that bothered to respond and that I didn't lose. I got rejected again and again and again and again and again. And I want to show you this because this is the reality, and it's okay. Because, look, I'm here, and I survived it. It was painful at the time. But do you want to be the writer? And so there's some in this room. I'm not going to point fingers, but there are some writers in this room that got their first thing accepted. They don't have the battle scars, you guys. They don't have the battle scars. They can't show this up here. All they have are beautiful memories. No therapy bills whatsoever. Is that the kind of writer you want to be? The natural, the gifted one, the golden child. Really? Is that what you want? No. You want to be the trench writer, right? You want to be the one with the gas mask on and fighting through the mud and, stabbed repeatedly over and over again. That's the goal, right? Anyway, will you roll that up for me? Thanks, Gabe. For some reason, I kept going, and it was so painful. And I remember at one point saying, I'm just going to post Goose Girl online somewhere. I just would like to share it, even though no one's ever going to like it. Because maybe I have even some of the rejection letters up here for that. Oh, I was going to tell you about Goose Girl. That's okay. I can go back to that. Blah, blah, blah. These are some of the rejection letters I got. They're addressed to my agent. You can see some of the underlines. Many young adult books are becoming more and more edgy. Perhaps you can steer Ms. Hale towards less traditional retellings, or if she prefers this style, towards shorter stories for a slightly younger group. Someone else says, I ultimately didn't think the story itself was consistently strong enough to hold a young reader's interest. I did not find the story compelling enough to maintain my interest. The rather slow and deliberate pacing of the plot does not bode well for a middle grade audience. Somehow I didn't put in there the one that called my writing stiff, cliched, and self-conscious. But I remember that one. Eventually, it was rejected by everybody. The Goose Girl, you guys. The frickin' Goose Girl. It was voted by teens across the United States as one of their top 10 favorite books of all time of the year. But of all time, probably. won multiple awards. Yeah, and so I'm just saying, the Goose Girl, so there you go. Thank you, Gabe. No, but, at the time, I thought that, let's just give it up for Gabe. He's so darling, right? At the time, I thought it meant that I sucked, that I wasn't good enough. But what I've come to realize in the very transcendental way that you can at the other end of the roll of rejections is that rejection is good. As much as it hurts, it's good. When I started out sending out stuff, if it had been accepted at that point, I would be trying to get my short stories collected in the New Yorker, and I would have been going a completely different direction than where I am now. I'm so grateful that those were rejected, because I ended up where I needed to be. When I started writing, when I started submitting stuff, I didn't know young adult literature existed. It didn't exist when I was a teenager. So to stumble into this field, to be here, I fully credit Amy Jameson, who's going to be at this conference, if she's not already here, who was my agent, who said this is young adult literature, and was the only person willing to even read my story. No other agent would even look at it. So it pushed me to where I wanted to be. And I didn't, back then I just want anybody to say yes. But in the long term, I wanted to end up with an editor who genuinely loved my story and was willing to take a risk on it. And I'm with the same editor now that I was 12 years ago because of that. And I'll just tell you a little bit about how The Goose Girl began. I wanted to write a story. My favorite story my favorite writer when I was younger was Robin McKinley. I loved The Blue Sword and Hero and the Crown. And her first story was called Beauty. It was based on Beauty and the Beast. And I was in that real funk, that reading funk. And I was trying to remember, when was reading still fun? And I thought back to the time when I was reading books like Robin McKinley's book. So I decided to base a book on my favorite fairy tale, which was The Goose Girl. And the thing that compelled me about it was not that it was a nice, easy plot. I don't know many writers that are interested in writing nice, easy stories. I think what motivates me and a lot of writers is when things get really complicated, when there's a lot of questions. Because the process of writing is not just putting down a story that's already in my head. It's a process of discovery and exploration. And so I looked at the story of the Goose Girl, which is a very strange story, and left me with a lot of questions. How does she control the wind? Why did she agree to let this false princess take her identity? What about the prince? How can she talk to that horse head? Whoa, I'm not touching anything. Why is it doing that? Freaking out. And now it's retreating. It's like a roulette wheel, He's like, where is it gonna stop? And big money, big money, big money, forest. All right. Yeah, give it up for the forest. Yeah. Well, I'm afraid to touch any buttons. You want to take that? You're going to fix it. This is our tech master. I know these guys. My husband says, guys, they have no idea what they're doing. They just start pressing things and taking out batteries and putting them back. They have no idea what they're doing. I see right through you. All right. Regardless, we'll work it out. But, okay. So the story again left me with a lot of questions. And then when, at that point, every single one of you could rewrite the story of the Goose Girl, and it would be a different book. And it's just, what can I bring to this story? What does my mind want to bring to it? And for me, with this story, I've retold several fairy tales, but this one I wanted to be as true to the origin as I could. There was something in this story that it fascinated me, that it survived hundreds of years of oral tradition. So I wanted to root it in the dark forest, in the Black Forest, in its roots in Germany, and in this kind of landscape with these kinds of castles, these kinds of possibilities, and make it just a really unapologetic, epic fairy tale. So that's what I ended up doing. As you know, got a lot of rejections, but it became The Goose Girl. It spawned 4 sort of sequels. And I have kids now, and I didn't when I started out. And one of the great things about having kids is just remembering how much fun it is to read, to recommend books, and what they get out of it. Reading has become such an important part of our life. That's my son. One great thing about kids, too, is it reminds me how kids see everything for the first time. We start to get jaded as we get older, yeah, and the world isn't so magnificent anymore. But in order to be an artist of any kind, in order to be a writer, the world has to stay magnificent for us all the time. We have to remain children, always seeing it fresh. And having kids helps me to keep seeing it fresh. And there's our Batman and Robin. You see the orc, but and there's so many different sides to the same kid. There's got to be a variety of characters because kids are different. Oh yeah, I know. What can you say? So we have a crazy house. But this is one of my favorite quotes by G.K. Chesterton. He's talking about fairy tales. These tales say that apples were golden, only to refresh the forgotten moment when we found that they were green. They make rivers run with wine, only to make us remember for one wild moment that they run with water. That's cut off. So you have to fill in the blank there. I didn't realize it was cut off. But yeah, they run with water. Making art, making everything fresh and new. This landscape should be familiar to you. This is what inspired one of my later books, Princess Academy. Here's a quarry, a stone quarry. And I really went home for this book. Even though it's long ago, far away, it felt very familiar, very grounded in the landscape that I knew. And this was the book that I thought everybody was going to hate. Because I'd been writing Goose Girl and Anna Burning and these kind of big sweeping epic stories. And this was a smaller story. And I really wanted to tell almost an anti-fairy tale. And it's called Princess Academy, and there's actually no princesses in the book. And I thought everybody's going to be so mad at me. And this has become by far my most successful book. And it's taught me from the very early part of my career that you cannot anticipate what people are going to like. You cannot write to outside yourself. And I've learned the only thing I can do is write to my internal reader, write to what I love. So it is your job as a writer to hone that internal reader till you have a really smart internal reader, and then to maintain the integrity of writing to that while also taking excellent feedback. And Palace of Stone followed up Princess Academy. We left the mountain in Palace of Stone. We went down to the city. It was based on a Scandinavian feeling of a kingdom. When I make fantasy lands, I want to make them still. Whenever you do a fantasy, you want to have as much grounded, factual, gritty details as possible, make it feel really real. You can't get too crazy or your audience won't stay with you. So when I'm creating a fantasy world, I almost always base it into actual historical places and do a lot of research that I can cull from. Another great quote from G.K. Chesterton: fairy tales don't tell us that dragons exist, they tell us that dragons can be defeated. Another fairy tale that I worked on, and I want you to think about, as I'm telling you the story of this fairy tale, because it's probably one that most of you aren't familiar with, think about it as a writer. So as I tell you at the beginning of this fairy tale, think about what questions you would have to answer as a writer. Because when you're going into a story, it's all about the questions. You should start questioning. You start with questions. You don't start with answers. So there's a story of a fair princess, and her father wants her to marry a certain king. She doesn't want to marry the king. She wants to marry this other prince. The father, to punish her, puts her into a tower, bricks up the window and door, and locks her in there for 7 years with her maid. All right, thinking as a writer, those of you who have not read Book of 1,000 Days, what questions do you have to answer? Yeah, shout it out. How does she eat? Great. Yeah.
Why did the king want her to marry the other?
Yeah, why did her father want her to marry the king? What's behind that? Yeah.
Why is the maid in there with her?
Why is the maid in there with her? I love how loud you guys are. You're so bold. How old is the maid?
What does she do in there?
What did they do in there for 7 years?
Does the maid do anything?
Does the maid do anything? What?
Really, does she do anything?
Does she do anything? Oh, there's so many answers to that maid. Yeah.
Does the prince try to save her?
Does the prince try to save her? That's what they do, right? What use is a prince? Yeah. Where does she go to the bathroom? I cannot do this at a middle school without getting that question, and it's an excellent question. Yeah.
How does she meet the prince?
How does she meet the prince? So what's their backstory? Yeah.
Why does she love the prince?
Why does she love him? Yeah.
Does she have a plan for escape?
Did she have a plan for escape? Why did she punish the maid? Right, so the princess did something, and that was the key for me for that story, actually. As I'm reading this story is, at least the princess sort of had a choice. She could have said, okay, I'll marry the king. But what did the maid do to get locked up in this? And what really made me angry is the Grimm brothers, they do escape from the tower eventually about halfway through the story. And at that point, they drop the maid entirely from the narrative. And the rest of the story just follows the princess. And I was so mad on behalf of this fictional, non-existent maid. I was like, ugh! And that's what motivated me. It wasn't that, isn't it a beautiful, lovely story? It's because it made me angry. And getting angry at stories is a great motivation to dig in and get at them. And so I told the whole story from the point of view of the maid. It's her journal. I wanted to get as close to her as I possibly could. And I chose to set it in a place that was inspired by medieval Mongolia. It was really fun to visit that landscape. When I started out, I had a feeling that I couldn't tap into any areas of history or culture that weren't part of my blood heritage. I went to Scandinavia, I went to Germany, I went to England, I went to these sorts of Northern European places where my ancestors came from, because I didn't think I had a right to anybody else's story. And then I got over it, and I thought, but there are other cool places, and I'm not trying to speak on behalf of all Mongolians. I just want to say, hey, I want to celebrate a little piece of what makes you awesome. And as writers, I think that that's our right, if we do it respectfully. This is a 14th century tower in Mongolia. You can see how thick the walls are, how hard it would be to escape from something like that. There are some drawings and some sketches in the book that she makes in her diary. This is from inside. It's a rat trap. It's pretty cool. Anyway, they do escape, and things happen thereafter. That's the Book of 1,000 Days. The next project we took up is my husband and I wanted to work together. And we were like, let's combine forces. I love to take two things that don't belong together. And I pretty much in all my books try to take a genre and a form that don't usually go together and see what I can bring together. So we decided we'd take my husband's favorite thing, which are comic books, superhero comic books, and mine, which are fairy tales, and combine them. And we came up with Rapunzel, the comic book superhero. Rapunzel is the stupidest fairy tale of all time. Just to tell you briefly why, blah, 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 she ends up in the tower, climbs up her hair, and that's really owie. And then the prince comes, and he visits her, and she's like, I've never seen a man before, but they end up hanging out. He comes back to visit her all the time, and he's going to help her escape. So each time he comes, he brings her raw silk for her to weave into a ladder so they can get out. And I'm thinking, is this the dumbest prince anywhere in the world? Where in the world is there like so much raw silk, but there's not a single ladder, you know? Or like a sword. Does he not have a sword to cut off her hair and tie it off and they can get out? I'm like, either he's just not very bright, or he has the best intentions, because they do have love babies. And he has no intention of helping her escape. I mean, it's really a questionable story. So we dumped the prince. This was long before Tangled. Stupid Disney. We decided to base it in the Old West. And to give that kind of flavor, we wanted like a big Hollywood Western kind of feel, because it's a graphic novel. And so her hair grows, she's bored, she's skipping rope with her hair, she whips the spider with it. She ends up, because she's in the Old West, training herself to use her braids as whip and lasso, escapes from the tower, becomes this vigilante hero in the Old West with this guy named Jack. Anyway, and that was our answer to the stupid fairy tale, to make it awesome. And here's Calamity Jack was a sequel. And so what we did, and we'll talk about a little bit of this in my rewriting workshop, is to take two things that don't belong together. So we took setting and fairy tale, changed Rapunzel to Old West, fairy tale and genre, Rapunzel plus Western. In Jack, we did Jack and the Beanstalk plus urban setting, big city. Or we also played with genre. We did fairy tale plus the caper story, the heist story, and to see what we could get. And so that's a great way to generate ideas for writing, is to mix it up, change stories where they don't belong. Awesome Land is one of my books, and And it's a movie. It was just at Sundance. It'll be out this summer. But Gabe's seen it, right, Gabe? How is it? Yeah. Pretty freaking hilarious, right? Pretty much laughed the whole time. Yeah. All right. So going back to my younger self, when I decided I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to write because I wanted to tell stories. But I also had this idea that being a writer would make me special, that I would suddenly become that wonderful and adored person that I didn't feel like I was, but I thought that I could be. Or at the very least, I hoped that I could have that kind of hair. There was a sitcom called Head of the Class, and this redhead had this wonderful curly hair, and everybody always said, "Why don't your hair look like hers?" And so that's what I was trying to do when I got the perm. But as you see, it didn't work out. But what is so cool once I became a writer, especially in children's literature, is I found out that it's actually not about me, and I'm almost irrelevant in the process. That when you become a writer, it's not about being special. It's about being part of a team. And there are a lot of teams involved. This is my team literature. A lot of different people. Teachers and librarians are a huge part of what we do every day in children's and young adult literature. They're awesome. Booksellers, and I just want to say, if you want to be a writer, have a local bookstore that you go to. Try not to buy your books online, and support your local bookstore. The future of the industry is so dependent, more than you know. Debut authors being able to break out, be seen, meeting new authors. So much of it is from bookstores. So support your bookstores. Book folk in the publishing industry, they do so much. Editors are so important, professional editors at professional publishing houses, and everything that they do, I honor them. Readers, of course, are a huge part of it, and it is so fun to get to meet wonderful readers. Oh, this is a writer friend, Guy Francis. I think it's Guy Francis. Pretty sure it's Guy. Now I'm suddenly questioning myself. Anyway, this is his daughter. He sent me a picture of his daughter sleeping with one of my books, and he's like, "Why couldn't have been my book?" But you notice that most of these are girls. And so I just want to assure the guys here that real men read Princess Academy. Gentlemen, I promise if you read a book about a girl, you're not going to turn into a girl. Promise. I promise. Here's another. That's my Gabriel. That's my nephew there and his little brother reading side by side. I did a whole series of this on my blog of guys reading Princess Academy. I need to do an update because I've got one of John Sheska reading it and James Dashner. Anyway. But they were all good sports. But Gabe's read Princess Academy, right, Gabe? Yeah, and how is it? Yeah, fantastic. Guys, if you want to be writers, you can't only read books about guys. Girls, you want to be writers, you can't only read books about girls. You got to expand. Writers are part of this whole team. It is really fun to be a writer. And I just want to tell you all, welcome to Crazy Town. If you're sure. If you're sure you want to do this. Because it is Crazy Town, and you probably already live in it. I remember being your age and my mom saying to me one day, "Shannon, you live in a fantasy land." And I was so shocked because I thought I'd been keeping it so well hidden, in our head all the time, right? You become a little bit insane. And the best way to describe what it's like to be a writer is it's like a mental illness. You get the urge, I need to play with some characters. There's people in my head talking to me, and I have to write it down. Right? You know this. Becoming a writer means you learn to read like a writer. This is awesome because every time you read, you're not just enjoying the story, but you're examining how did the writer do what she or he did. But at the same time, it takes away some of the enjoyment because you start to, you're looking at the works behind it. And you can't only just get lost in story anymore. You're always thinking like a writer. You're honing your internal editor. Workshops are great for that. If you only read really great polished stuff, it's hard to hone your internal editor. So you need to be doing workshops and reading less polished writing that is not your own so you can start to be objective about it. You got to read what you love, of course, but you also need to read everything. As writers, you need to have a broad base of understanding. Read outside your genre. Read those classics. Read the dead people. Read the new people. Read what's being published now. Read everything. And this is huge. I want to say, don't worry about getting published right now. This is so far in the future. Just assume it's far in the future. I wrote for 19 years before I first published anything, so much as a short story or anything. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when you get published. There's a couple really high-profile young writers that get published, and so sometimes teens get the idea that I need to get published by the time I graduate from high school or something. Throw that out. Just know it's okay just to write for fun. Some of you may have written 10 books. Some of you may have never written anything but decided that someday you're going to. Some of you may have started 10 books and have written the first chapter. Some of you may just jot little random vignettes in your notebook whenever you think of them. There's all different experiences and levels, and that's okay. It's okay just to write for fun. And I'll tell you something else. If you become a professional novelist, and if publishing in bookstores still exists by the time you're an adult, that is awesome. If you don't, that is also awesome. I learned that everybody said when I went to get an MFA in creative writing, like, that is the dumbest degree and it's so unmarketable. I've never had trouble finding work because so many professions need strong writers. The best way to learn how to be a strong writer is just to write a lot. Creative writing helps you become a strong writer no matter what kind of writing you do in the future. What you're doing and the skills you're learning at this conference are going to be applicable whether you are a fiction writer or an engineer or a stay-at-home mom or a teacher or a professor of physics. It doesn't matter. Whatever you do, everybody needs writing skills. And I've noticed, I kept some track of some traits of writers and see that I find that are really common in professional writers. First of all, daydreamers. Are you guys chronic daydreamers? Of course you are. Infinitely curious. Writers always want to understand and learn more. And part of that is a natural learner. And by that, I don't mean that you're a fast learner necessarily, but that you like to learn. You're interested in learning new subjects. Big part of being a writer. Fascinated by people. Where writers are very rarely bullies because they're thinking about how that other person is feeling and thinking and making up a story in their head about what their home life is. This is really common with writers. You have to have empathy for other people when you're channeling them to become characters. Writers are very often empathetic. Writers tend to be very intelligent, not necessarily have highest SAT scores or get straight A's, that doesn't matter, but tend to be intelligent in some way. There's so many different kinds of intelligence. I do not understand physics for the life of me, but there's many different kinds. And writers that I know that tend to keep going are self-motivated, critical part of being a writer. And then you also know a writer when you see one because he, she is, and that's it. Everything else doesn't matter. Guy or girl, age, social background. You don't have to have been abused and orphaned at a young age in order to be a writer. You could be middle class, you can be wealthy, you can be nothing in between. You can be any religion or no religion. You could be gay or straight. You could be tall or short or thin or fat. Nothing else matters. There's so much diversity in the writing field. There is absolutely no mold. All that matters is that you write. So it is really fun to be a writer and get to be friends with other writers. And this is my friend Ann Cannon. She's a local writer. You can see we're going for a walk together because we're really close. Here I am visiting my good friend Brandon Mull at his house. We're good friends. Me and Libba Bray had a walk in the woods. Here I am with Linda Sue Park at a signing. Here I'm with Lauren Miracle, Joe Knowles, Robin Wasserman, great friends. This is Jacqueline Woodson, of course, and she knows I always have her back. Holly Black and I, we could just talk for hours. This is my Neil Gaiman place where I go just to recenter there. This is my friend Jessica Day George. We actually live nearby each other, so we'll go out, we'll walk her dog together in the neighborhood and just talk.